when you approach middle age, you expect you're going to start losing people.
Right.
But you don't expect to lose so many in such quick succession. And so at one point I felt like I was not even having time to process any grief because I just had more grief being heaped onto me.
Hello, and welcome to the 40 Drinks podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie McLaughlin. Sometime in the years around our 40th birthday, many of us start to feel what I call the ick. Like some part of your life that had been working well no longer works, and you don't know what to do about it. I know that was true for me, and I fought against it, which only made it a messier process. But having 40 drinks with 40 people over the course of a year helped me escape the influence of that ick. On this podcast, I welcome you to tap into my stories and experience, as well as those of my guests, to help you emerge from your own ick and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes we made along the way. My mission is to make it common cultural knowledge that there is a transition most of us face around age 40, and then showcase so many versions of that transition that every single person approaching or recently turned 40 with dread in their heart knows that they are not alone. Today, my guest is Gabby Gilliam, who lost her dad the year of her 40th birthday. And though her husband threw her a lovely party to celebrate, Gabby struggled with the milestone and then embarked upon 2 more years of consistent loss. Hey, Gabby, thanks so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you as well. I'm very interested to dive into this conversation. You and I share some experiences with loss. And so I'm really interested to hear how you moved your way through it and kind of compare and contrast with how I made it through. But before we get there, why don't we start at the beginning? Tell me about the forces that shaped you into the person you were kind of in your early to mid 30s. Where are we before our story starts?
Okay, so I kind of did everything very slowly and very late. So my husband and I dated for 10 years before we got married. And so I had my child just before my 30th birthday. So I didn't become a parent until my 30s. And so my 30s were basically, lots of sleepless nights and a very energetic toddler, actually a lot of moving. So we moved to be closer to my husband's job when my son was 4. And so that would have been almost mid 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And we moved from a whole house to a 2-bedroom apartment in another state. It was just far enough away from everybody that we knew that we couldn't realistically see them very often. So we would try to go down on weekends, but it was hard. And then within a year, we moved from that apartment to a 3-bedroom apartment because we needed more space. But we didn't like the schools where the apartments were. And so within less than a year, probably, we moved into a townhouse. And from there, my son started kindergarten. And it was a lot of moving back to back to back. And I'm lucky I have very supportive parents. So my mom and my dad helped us with every move. And then when my son was in 3rd grade, maybe not long before the pandemic, we moved one more time to the townhouse that we are in now. And it's actually right down the street from the other townhouse, but it was more space and it's more open. And so it was still an upgrade for us, even though it's the same neighborhood, but he goes to the same schools. I used to be able to walk to work. It was very nice. And so we finally started really establishing ourselves here and building a community here once my son started kindergarten. So it was a little lonely just because we didn't really know anybody here, but it was also hard because it didn't feel like we were getting to set down roots because we just kept moving and isolating. So I really missed my family. I really missed my friends that were still back in Virginia. And so it was a little rough coming in. And then I had a lot of trouble finding work when we moved up here. So I had been a supervisor at the public library where we lived in Virginia. And it was my favorite job ever. Probably working at the library was a dream. And so when we moved up here, I thought that I would get a job at the library here. I had tons of experience. I couldn't. Not even as a page, somebody who shelves books. I couldn't get hired for anything. So for a little bit, I was a stay-at-home mom and very stir crazy. It did not work well for me. So when my son started kindergarten, his school put out a call for help with recess and lunch. I signed on for that and it was wonderful, perfect schedule. I worked midday so I could still get him ready for school in the morning and I was still ready for him in the afternoon when he got home. But I also got out of the house, which was
Yeah.
really nice. And eventually I ended up becoming the secretary at his elementary school. And so I went from part-time to working full-time again. That was a bit of a transition. I wanna say that was probably a year or 2 before my 40th birthday, where I finally went back to working full-time. So I worked full-time job up until about a year before I had my son.
Wow.
So I had 5 years of weird part-time, sometimes working, and like I said, it was hard for me. I like to be busy, I like to be doing things, I also like to leave my house, and
Yeah.
so I would say my early to mid-30s was a rough time for me because I felt very unmoored. I
Yeah.
didn't have much of a direction other than being a mom, and I didn't want that to be the only thing I had going on.
Yeah, and it sounds too like there was a lot of change. I mean, that many moves in that short a time is unmoored is the perfect word there. Holy cow. That's a
Yeah, it
lot of
was like we
moving.
barely had time to unpack boxes before it was time to repack boxes.
Oh, that's the worst. Moving is just the worst. When we first spoke, you said that for a lot of those years in your 30s, you were marking time basically by your son and his age? Tell me a little bit
Yes.
about that.
So, like I said, I was 30 when I
Mhm.
had him. Also, I kind of quit working full time to stay at home with him because like daycare costs kind of balanced out
Right.
me staying at home. And so I was home with him for a while. And then, like I said, I went back to work when he turned 5 and went to kindergarten.
Yeah.
And then gradually made my way to working full time. And
Yep.
then right around the time that he went to middle school is around the time of my 40th birthday because
Mhm.
he was 10. And so I turned 40 and then also decided I didn't really want to be a secretary anymore. And so I went back to grad school, got my teaching certificate, and it's his last year of middle school, and it's my first year teaching. So, we're kind of going through milestones together, which has been both challenging and kind of wonderful because it just seems to be syncing up in a very organic way, which has been nice. But even though I said, you know, I kind of wanted to be more than just a mom, I feel like being a mom has very much shaped everything that has happened, which I'm sure is true for every mom. Since my son has been born, like, things seem to just be gravitating around him.
Yeah. So, but you have I'm not exactly sure how to characterize it, a hobby, a pastime, a side gig. You're a writer as well. So tell me
I
about that.
am. I've been a writer for a very long time. I would say I don't wanna say a serious writing habit, it makes me sound, like, addicted to writing, but I didn't start actually sitting down and writing with intention until I was in high school. I started
Mhm.
taking some creative writing classes, and I started writing even outside of school, and I noticed that I really enjoyed it. And so, I wrote mostly for myself, didn't really expect anybody to read it. I still have those notebooks and still nobody reads them. They are just in my room in a box. But then when I got into college, I took some more creative writing classes and I had the privilege of taking a poetry seminar with Claudia Emerson, who later went on to win the Pulitzer for poetry, I believe for the collection of poems that she was workshopping with us. And I loved that she workshopped her poems with us too. So she was a working poet and she would accept our feedback on what she was working on while giving feedback, and that meant a lot to me. I still didn't do anything with my own poetry though. But while workshopping poems with her, it was almost like she was having us put a chapbook of poems together as our final project. And
Hmm.
so we were writing poems on a theme, and I chose family. And that theme still is very heavy in my writing now. I did end up getting one poem that I wrote for that class published back in 2004, and then I didn't publish anything for many, many years after that. It was just kind of a one-off. It was a poem about my grandma, and
Hmm.
I was very happy when it got accepted somewhere. But then, I had to go and get a job and start paying bills. I did start working full time, kept writing, filling
Hmm.
more notebooks, and locking them away. And then when my son was born, I decided instead of keeping a daily journal, I was going to start writing a poem a day.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of times they were like little mini journal entries. It would
Hmm.
be something that we did that day or something he had done that day. But I really wanted to start getting into the daily practice of writing again. And once he was in school and I was working again, I decided, I was again probably mid to late 30s. I
Yeah.
decided I need to stop sitting on all of this writing. Beyond poetry, I had short stories, I had novels, I had all of these things that I had worked on over the years, just sitting gathering dust. And so I decided I was going to start trying to do something. I joined during COVID a virtual writing group with my
Hmm.
library, and I met a writer there who is very prolific. She writes a lot, she gets published a lot. She is just very motivated. And so that was very motivating for me.
Yeah.
And one of the things that she had told me was that she tries to get 100 rejections a year
Mm.
because she feels like then she's getting her work out there enough that statistically she's going to end up with pieces somewhere
Yeah.
if she's able to gather 100 rejections. So I decided I could do that. I was like, you know what? If I'm setting my goal for rejection, then basically every acceptance is a bonus. It's a
Right.
win. And I'm expecting failure, so it's not going to hurt as much. It's not
Right.
going to be a surprise. That's my goal.
Yeah.
And so I started to submit some things. And my very first story got published right before my dad got really, really sick, and we knew that we were going to lose him. So then I feel like I became even more motivated because I knew that he would have been so proud of me.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I can't quit. Even though right now everything is a disaster and is falling apart, it's even more reason for me to keep pushing through. And so, like, even with grad school going on and everything else going on, I've really tried to keep up with submitting. And so now I'm not necessarily aiming for the 100 rejections anymore, but I do like to have at least 50 pieces that are out on
Mm.
submission, and I'm just waiting to hear back.
Yeah.
So my approach has definitely changed over time, but the writing has always been there.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So now let's tie in this last thread, which you just touched on a little bit. Tell me about your dad.
When it comes to talking about the beginning and what shaped me into what I am now, I mean, he's a huge part of that. Growing up, he was always present. Like when we had sporting events, he would come straight from work and he would be there cheering us on. And like I said, we moved so many times, and he was always there with a carload or a truckload of stuff, helping us move. If something broke, he would always offer to come fix it even after we moved so far away. So
Mm.
he was always a pillar of support
Yeah.
for all of us, for me and my sisters. His decline was very rapid during COVID. It was like right after July 4th because my son had done a Cub Scout project with him. So we had just gone down there and he had shown my son how to use power tools for the first time, and they had a very good bonding. experience. And then within a few days, my mom called me to say he'd been out working on the pool or something and he had fallen and he was in the hospital because he had a lot of stroke symptoms and they were trying to figure out whether he had bumped his head and it had caused a brain bleed or if the brain bleed had caused him to fall and it was like a whole thing. And so he was in the hospital for a while and did some rehab. And so that fall happened in July and he made steady progress up until February, and he was actually it was the day he was supposed to go to the doctor to get cleared to be able to drive again, and when my mom went in to wake him, he was actually on the floor
Mm.
and couldn't get up, and so he got medevaced to the hospital. It was less than 2 weeks later, and he was gone. So it was I would say it wasn't, like, absolutely unexpected, but we it definitely took us by surprise because we thought that he was getting better, and then all
Right.
of a sudden, he wasn't. And so, we brought him home from the hospital on Valentine's Day. So, Valentine's Day was a Sunday, and then he passed away on Friday. So,
Wow.
it was so, so, so fast. In the midst of all of that, my son has he's got his Chromebook at my parents' house and he's doing virtual school. I'm doing virtual meetings while sitting by my dad's bedside. I also hurt my foot during that time. And so I hadn't been able to go to the doctor to get a boot. So they were just telling me to like hop around on one foot in the meantime.
That's
So I was
helpful.
trying to help care for my dad so that my sisters weren't doing it all on their own. But at the same time, only able to use one foot and it was just a series of unfortunate events,
Yeah, sounds
um,
like a mess.
and my family also we just humor is like our coping mechanism, so we're all trying to keep each other's spirits up, but it was a very challenging time, and I'm very grateful that I had my sisters with me to be able to get through it. He passed away in February, and my 40th birthday was in October. So my very first birthday without my dad was my 40th. And so I feel
Yeah.
like it just made it hit really hard for
Yeah.
me.
So before your dad got sick, what would you have thought of your 40th birthday or turning 40? Like, did it have any meaning, any weight, anything attached to it before things kind of went sideways?
Not really. I know it's supposed to be a huge milestone, and so I guess in the back of my mind, I know it's there and I know it's coming. I knew that I wanted to start doing different things in regard to work, but had only just started to put those things in motion. I think maybe I was taking some prerequisite courses
Mhm.
at that time or was about to start later in the semester. And so I knew it was coming. I wanted to maybe get together with friends, people I hadn't seen in a while, just to kind of reconnect, but
Yeah.
expected it would mostly be family, maybe just getting together and hanging out for the day. I'm a pretty low key person.
Okay.
So, like, I don't really do big events for myself. I love to plan them for other people, but when it comes to me, like, I'm perfectly fine with keeping something small. So I just
Yeah.
plan to spend it with my family and maybe some of my oldest friends.
Yeah. But your husband had other ideas.
He did.
Mhm.
So, and this is the second time he's done this for me. So when I turned 30, he surprised me by inviting everybody to our house. He knew I wouldn't want to go out because I had just had a baby a couple months before.
Mhm.
So he organized everybody to come over and bring food and a cake and just hang out at the house with me. So that was really wonderful. And so then for the 40th, he planned another surprise. He took me to this weird mansion in DC that's kind of like a scavenger hunt meets an escape room. Like you don't ever get stuck anywhere, but the whole house is filled with ephemera and it has all of these secret passages that you can find that lead you to other places within the house and it was a very cool place and he also picked my best friend up from the airport. She lives in Macon. He did not tell me that she was coming, So that was a lovely surprise, and it was so good to have her there, and I got to meet her daughter for the first time. She's a little baby, and then all of our family met us at the mansion. So
Mhm.
I didn't know that everybody else was gonna be there. I knew Jessica was gonna be there because she was at our house from the
Right.
airport. I didn't know who else was gonna be there, but we basically just we overran this house for a couple of hours, all of, like, my nieces and nephews, and running through and finding things on the scavenger hunt paper and trying to find all of the secret passages that they told us about. And so it was a lovely evening.
Yeah.
It
Sounds
was
like
a
a great
lovely
party.
surprise. I wish that I had been able to appreciate it more, and I felt terrible because when we got home, like, I went upstairs and just kind of sat in my closet and cried for a little while
Yeah.
because it wasn't until we were all together that, like, it really hit me that my dad wasn't there and that
Yep.
there wasn't gonna be anything that I could do to have him there. And it didn't help that my sister-in-law, who is a beautiful and wonderful person, made me this lovely gift that was like, be the things that you love most about the people who are gone. And it was a picture of me and my dad on my wedding day. So, like, it was a beautiful gift, but I feel like it was like a shot to the heart
Yeah.
for me, especially on that day.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's hanging on my living room wall now. I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
it.
yeah,
I like
yeah.
it. I treasure that gift, but I feel like, oh
Too
my
much
gosh,
all
it
at once.
really, right.
Yeah.
It was too much. And so as quietly as I could, went and cried in my closet because I was like, I don't want my husband to think that I hate what he did for me. Like, it was so good, but at the same time, like, I just can't stop crying. So
Yeah.
I'm like, trying to cover
Yeah.
my face and just, oh,
Yeah.
so took me a little bit, but I finally got myself together. But I feel like that set off like a sequence of things because my dad's birthday is around mine also, and then we have Thanksgiving and then Christmas. And so, like, it was all of these
Yeah.
firsts without him, and they were just all hitting me at one time. And so it was rough because then, of course, after Christmas, we get to February, which is the anniversary of losing him.
Yeah, rapid
Blow after
fire.
blow after
Yeah.
blow. It was a hard birthday, but it was like I appreciate that my husband made it as special as he could.
Yeah, that's really sweet. There's a lot that I can relate to here because my dad got sick. I was in my early 40s and my dad got sick. And my husband and I had gotten engaged and we were planning our wedding so we got engaged in July. We were planning our wedding for Memorial Day the following year. And in February, we got word from his doctors that sooner rather than later is better. And
Yeah.
so we threw away all of our plans, every last one. As a matter of fact, the day after that doctor's appointment, we had a meeting with a friend who was catering and kind of stepping in as sort of like wedding planner kind of person. And he had come with linens and plates and stuff, like all this stuff to like, this is for, this is the plan we were headed towards. And so as soon as he
Mhm.
sat down at the house, we kind of said, well, we have to make some changes. And he literally just picked everything up, put it all behind him, and said, all right, what are we going to do? And we planned and executed a wedding in 29 days.
Wow.
Yeah. And let me tell you, we didn't make it a little one either. I mean, we still wanted people to come. So I think like 155 people showed up 29 days later. It was wild. And some people that we had not expected either. Some of my husband's college friends came in from afar, and literally friends of mine from Greece flew home. And so it was,
Wow.
yeah, it was really special. And I always like to think of it was my dad's last best day, I think. But you're going through treatment and there's good days and there's good weeks and bad weeks. Hi, we'll get back to the conversation in just a minute. We are about halfway through this examination of midlife transition. And if you're enjoying Gabby's story and finding comfort or a sense of camaraderie in her journey, then please hit subscribe, Leave a review or share this episode with a friend who might appreciate this insight into midlife's unexpected twists and turns. Who knows? Maybe you'll help someone discover a part of themselves they've been searching for. And if you want to learn more about the 40 transition, please consider getting on my email list where I explore this topic in different ways than I do here in my guest episodes. You can do that on my website, 40drinks.com, and spell out the word 40. There's a contact button right at the top of the page if you want to drop me a line, and a subscribe button if you want to get on that email list. All right, back to the show. So a week before my wedding, he looks at me and he says, I think we should go take dance lessons. What do you think? And I said, well, 3 weeks ago, you couldn't pick your head up off the pillow. So whatever the heck you want, we will do.
Right.
So, oh God, I love this story. We went and in secret took dance lessons. My mom knew, Patrick knew, and I think one of my dad's sisters knew. And that was it. So the day of the wedding, we did it at a local museum. So it was all in one place. So, he walked me, down the stairs and then seated. And then at the beginning of the reception, he stayed seated most of the beginning of the reception. And everybody kind of knows. I mean, I had sent the save the dates. And then the week later I had to send, whoops, sorry, no, here's your invitation.
Oh my God.
So everybody knew that my dad was kind of sick. And so, he's sitting and just very kind of low key, which was, I think, a little unusual for my dad. So when he got up to make his toast and said, now I'd like to dance with my daughter, we brought the house down with a foxtrot to Frank Sinatra, not a dry eye in the house. The place went wild because everybody thought he was seated all night because he was unwell. Meanwhile, he was literally just saving his legs for that moment. The rest of the night, he was on the dance floor.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, I just so relate to the devastation of losing your dad. And, we also are a family that uses humor. My dad was very, very a funny dude, very, very funny guy. So I relate to that a lot as well. And those firsts they just freaking suck.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
They hit hard. And
Yeah.
that they're going to, and they still take your breath away.
Right. Even if you try to plan for it, you have no idea what you're getting into.
Mm.
But for you, that was really just the beginning of a bunch of punches, one after another, right? So tell me a little bit about that.
So we lost my dad in February, like I said, and we start planning his services and everything. And a week before the date that we had planned for his funeral, so we were doing 2 funerals, one in Virginia and then one in New York, back where he and my mom grew up.
Mm-hmm.
So a week before the Virginia funeral, my mom got COVID, and my mom got COVID really bad. She was in the hospital for a while and on oxygen, and so for a little bit, we thought we were gonna lose our second parent within, a month
Yeah.
of losing the first one. She ended up thankfully recovering. She's fine. She's still with us, having it maybe, a month later than we had originally planned.
Mm-hmm.
And then Memorial Day weekend, we got a call that my husband's mom had suddenly passed away in her sleep. And so that took us all completely by surprise because she had not been, she had had some medical problems for her whole life, but nothing that would have led us to believe that it was imminent. It was very, very unexpected. And then my husband ended up having COVID during her funeral. And so my son and I had to go alone. We tried to make it work for him, but her funeral was an hour and a half away from our house. And he was like, I cannot make the drive. I will, it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah.
So he ended up not being able to go. And so that was kind of stressful because his family, of course, really wanted him there. And we had a hard time convincing them of how sick he was. So we get past that hurdle. And then we had the funeral for my dad in New York in June. And so we went up there, and the day after his service, while we were still with his side of the family, we got a call that his brother had passed away.
Goodness.
So I lost my uncle, and we unfortunately were not able to stay in New York for long enough to be able to be there for his service. So we ended up calling in and Zooming
Yeah.
his service. And so it was another blow. And then within not much longer after that, my dad's best friend's wife, who lived in Georgia, also passed away from cancer. And so I had to drive down to North Carolina for her funeral. And at the same time, my oldest friend, who has been neighbors with my parents for, oh my gosh, 35
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
maybe. Like, the first pictures I have of me and her together, I think I'm 5. So, it's been a long time,
Yeah.
that they have lived next to us, and she, was diagnosed with leukemia, and for years, like, she would bounce back and forth, it would go into remission, she would get well, and then it would flare up again, and she'd be in the hospital, and so I did a lot of hospital visits with her, and, like, the year after we lost my dad, we got the news that basically it was it. Like, they were not gonna be able to do anything else for her because blood transfusions were no longer working. They'd done a bone marrow transplant, and it wasn't like, it had worked for a little bit, but then had stopped, and so we ended up bringing her home into hospice care, and I spent basically every free moment that I had at her parents' house
Mm.
sitting with her. We ended up getting a lot more time with her than we expected because they had told us that they didn't think that she would make it until Halloween, and we had her until almost December. So we did get more time with her than we expected, but it was hard. And like, her daughter is basically the same age as my son. And then she has a son that's a little bit older. So her kids are still very
Yeah.
young.
Yeah.
And so just trying to go through that process and support both her and her family, and it was draining. It was hard.
That's
There's a
a
lot of loss for me and, like, all of that within maybe 2 years.
Yeah,
Um
that's a lot for a year or
Right.
2. That's 4 really close people, almost losing your mom. Oh my goodness.
And, like, you expect when you approach middle age, like, you're gonna start losing people.
Right.
Like, you know that it's happening, but you don't expect to, like, lose so many in such quick succession, and
Yeah.
so at one point, I felt like I was not even having time to process any grief because I just had more grief being heaped onto
Y
me. Like, it was
Yep.
just I couldn't even process one loss before another one happened. And I'd like to say, luckily, it's been a little bit of time since then,
Yeah.
and I'm hoping that it's gonna be a long time before
Right.
I experienced something like that again, but it
Right.
was just blow after blow after blow, and I felt like it left not just me reeling, but, like, my sisters and my mom, just all of us kind of spinning for a little while, and so my 40s really came in hitting hard.
Wow. And so that's really on top of the transitions that you're making in your own life with all the moves you've made and you're barely just settled and the career shifts that you're having and you have a young son that you're shepherding through different stages. I mean, that's really a lot to manage at once. How did you?
So, I actually fell back on my writing a lot. I have so many poems, and I probably have at least one, if not more, for every one of those losses. The ones for my dad could easily fill a book on their own. I mean, and even now, I'll sit down to write a poem, and I would say there's like an 80% chance that it's going to end up somehow being about him
Yeah.
because I'm still just working through that. My sisters really helped me. Just we're even though I live farther away now, we're still very close.
Mhm.
We talk a lot. We've taken some family vacations with all of us together to just give us time to be with each other and to give us some more happy memories to kind of,
Yeah.
balance out the recent ones we have that have been so unhappy. But really, I would say without my writing, I mean, I would have been in a much, much darker place. But also just wanting to still be there for my son and be able to support him and just to kind of show him, that yes, like your world can fall apart, but you can put yourself back together and like there's still so much that you can do even if it feels like you're losing so much that brings you joy in your life. Like you're going to be able to find new sources and it might take a while,
Yeah.
but you're going to get there.
So, one of the things that loss does for so many people is it really has a clarifying effect, and it really brings a lot of perspective to our lives of, life is precious and life is short and, all of that kind of stuff. I'm curious to know, because, this is all happening when you're 40, 41, 42. How did any of that clarifying or perspective change how you were approaching your own life or the things that you were doing in your life? Can you trace changes or transitions back to that period of loss?
I think I can. I don't think I would consciously have recognized this if not having been asked it. But there are a lot of things that I used to stress over or that I would hyper focus on.
Mhm.
And a lot of those things I don't care about as much anymore.
Yep.
Like it really puts into perspective what matters to you and what you need to worry about versus what really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things.
Mm.
And I feel like I have taken that into both work aspects and home aspects.
Mhm.
I really, when it comes to work, I don't like to leave things unfinished and I don't like to do a bad job of things. I'm very thorough and I'm very detail oriented, like almost a perfectionist when it comes to getting things done.
Mhm.
However, not as much these days.
Yeah.
So I will leave things, if I'm tired, I will walk away from it.
Mhm.
If I'm teaching, if we're in like the middle of a lesson and I realize that something's just not going to work, I will just abandon it and go and I'm like, okay, we're going to do something different now because this is not working out. And I feel like before I was such a rule follower. And I mean, I
Yes.
still am, if I'm being honest, I'm still very much a rule follower, but I've really learned to pick my battles. And I don't think that I had that kind of perspective really before all of this happened. I was constantly stressing about everything, trying to make sure everything was perfect all the time. And then I, completely finished everything. And now, if I showed you, like, if I panned this computer down and you could see the rest of my office and all of the unfinished things that are surrounding me, like, old me would be ashamed and appalled at how much I just will let go
Yeah.
these days. But I feel like I have started to focus more on what brings joy versus what needs to be done. And,
Mm.
like if I'm not liking a book, I will just stop reading the book.
Yeah.
Whereas before, it was almost like I had to finish it because I started it.
Right?
You know what I mean? But
I
these days, I'm
do.
like, who has time for that? Who has time for this terrible book? We're
Yeah.
just done. And so even like little things like that, I know it's a change that I could probably trace back to this.
Good. Those are positive changes. Those are, yeah.
Yeah, overwhelmingly positive for
Yeah.
sure. And I mean, other things too, like I take more pictures than I used to. Just because, when you like losing my friend, especially, I'm like, I've known her for 35 years. How do I have so few pictures of the two of us together? Like, we
Yeah.
literally grew up together. And I mean, granted, it was before everybody had a cell phone and was taking pictures all the time, but it just, you start to realize that you're going to want to have these
Yeah.
mementos because it's going to be at some point all that you have.
Yeah.
So those things become more precious too.
My dad's side of the family is very photographic. Like my grandfather, my dad's father always had a camera, he was the first guy on the block with video cameras, the whole thing. Like when we grew up, there was a room in that house with an entire wall. It's a pretty big room of just all slide reels from like
Mhm.
the 50s, 60s, 70s. And, one of the like special things to do would be like, can we look at slides? And, somebody would set up a
Yeah.
screen, turn the lights off. My dad always had cameras and we always took pictures and stuff. So there's a lot of pictures of our life growing up and stuff. And I've always loved taking pictures and having pictures and remembering things
Mhm.
by pictures. My husband's family, not at all. And so now, like during holidays and stuff, like I always make sure to take out my phone and take pictures because
Mhm.
they just don't, it's just not something, it's just not natural to them.
Yeah.
And yet we lost my mother-in-law a couple of years ago. And I was the one who had most of the recent pictures. I mean, there were old pictures of, her as a kid and her and my father-in-law, when they were young and when the kids were very little. So it's interesting that you say that, the taking more pictures, because I think
Mhm.
you're right. And it's so easy now. You don't have to
Yes.
buy film and get it developed or get slides made, or right. And storage is cheap. So why not just take a couple of pictures every time you're with people? So yeah, I can relate to that really, really strongly.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
absolutely the picture taker for us. Like, my
Mm.
sisters will even be like, "Make a Google album and share it with us." And so they'll each take a handful and they'll add them to the album, but then all of the rest of them
Yeah.
will be for me. And so, like, my side of the family just kind of knows that I'm
Yeah.
gonna be the one that does it. But the
Yeah.
downside of that is I don't have pictures with me in them.
I know. I
There's like,
am the same.
I'm just not there. And so
I'm going to tell you something that has changed the way I approach these things, because it's the same. I'm always the one taking the pictures. I could send you a link. I bought a selfie stick, and not just any old selfie stick, but a selfie stick that the bottom of it, the handle, turns into a little tripod so that you can use it as a selfie stick. And it's got this little remote, the Wi-Fi remote, so that when you set your phone up on a tripod, you pull the remote out and you go get in the picture and just click
you
your
just
little
click
button
it.
on the remote and you're in the picture.
I should probably get one of those.
I'm telling you, it's like $40 too. It's not even expensive. And it is spectacular. I went to Ireland this summer on a trip. We had a family reunion over there. I was the one taking pictures. I mean, everybody was taking pictures, but I got everybody together for the family picture and set it up on the tripod. There's 25 of us in the picture. I did the same thing at my nephew's med school graduation this spring too. So like, it's a game changer for the picture taker. It's a game changer.
I'm definitely intrigued.
Gabby, tell me, how has the concept of should played a role in your life, and has it shifted over time?
I think this really ties in with my whole abandoning my adherence to rules and finishing things. So, like I said, I'm a rule follower. I have
Yeah.
always been a rule follower. Growing up, like, my biggest fear was getting in trouble for things.
Mm.
Like, oh my gosh, such anxiety over it. And so, I got really good grades in school and I never got in trouble for anything. I
Yeah.
was always such a good little dutiful student and daughter, always trying to make sure that I was doing what I should be doing.
Mhm.
Getting older, and this probably started changing even when I had my son, because there are all these things as a mom that you should be doing or
Mhm.
that you thought you should be doing until you actually had a child and you realize that it's unrealistic.
Yep.
Before my son was born, I was like, I'm not going to buy him any toys that are weapons. I don't want to raise him with violent tendencies. Society is so saturated with that already. And then he literally turned any object into a weapon.
Yes.
Sticks, toilet paper tubes, anything, and I was like, "This is a battle that was lost before I even began fighting." You know what I
Yes.
mean? So
Yes, I
then I started
do.
buying him Nerf guns because I was like, "At least those don't hurt." The Nerf
Right.
guns don't hurt when they hit you. If you get hit with a stick, it hurts.
Right.
So, I abandoned that,
Yeah.
and then, like, the whole screen time
Mhm.
debate, there are so many good educational apps and things out there, and so also abandoned that because I was like, "This is literally teaching him his alphabet and the
Yeah.
phonics and, like, all of these things." And I was like, "I don't see anything wrong with this." So, there were all of these shoulds
Yeah.
that once I became a mom, I kinda started tuning out, and I was
Mhm.
like, "Okay, I'm gonna stop listening to other people's shoulds and
Yeah.
start listening more to what my shoulds are." But, even those have shifted, and I feel like I can trace a bit of the shift back to that time where I now will even say, I know I should do that, but I am going to do something else instead. So
Yeah.
just trying to prioritize joy a little more just because you start to see that your time is limited.
Yeah.
And why not take that joy when you can, even if it's not something that you should be doing?
Yep. Absolutely. Oh, so wonderful. Gabby, I have enjoyed having you so much. Thank you for joining me and for being so generous with your story and sharing your grief with us and your story of loss and resilience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share it. I feel like every time I talk about it, it helps me a little more.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
appreciate you being part of that process.
It's been my honor. Thanks so much for listening today. I am always so envious. Is that the right word? I think so. Envious of people who can use writing as a coping mechanism. As someone who is like a naturally born writer, for some reason, I have never been able to lean on that talent or skill like that. I feel like it's similar to my resistant. Anytime we had to do any like improv as a kid in ballet class or jazz class, I always wanted to know like what to do and have something to follow. I I just was never able to let loose like that, and my mind always went blank. Like, what am I supposed to do? And I've tried all the exercises, getting up early and writing before you're really awake, the 750 words. I don't know, I guess I'm just corked up real tight. One thing that Gabby illustrated really nicely in this conversation was the perspective shift that comes after loss. We go through so much of our lives thinking that all sorts of stuff is so important, all these daily things and our to-do lists and all the boxes we want to check in life. But losing someone close to you really helps provide perspective. And for Gabby, it helped her to get a handle on her perfectionism. All of a sudden, cleaning the dishes out of the sink isn't quite as important as spending a little extra time with someone you love, and that's certainly my example, not hers. Although her perfectionism may have led her to do the same thing. And it reminds me of that old saying, like, you are not going to lie on your deathbed and wish you had stayed later at work or met more work deadlines. You're going to wish you had spent more quality time with the people who are most important to you. So, grief often becomes a profound catalyst for reshaping our values and our approach to life. Because when we experience loss, it helps us to strip away the superficial, the day to day concerns, and really take heed of what truly matters. When I think about grief, I think it does a number of things. It clarifies our priorities and makes us reevaluate where we invest our time and our energy. After a loss, people often focus on more meaningful relationships, on personal fulfillment, and experiences that bring joy or fulfill purpose. So the things that we once worried about, like professional achievements or societal expectations, really start to take a back seat to deeper connections and chasing joy. Gabby talked about letting go of her perfectionism and prioritizing joy over tasks that previously had felt really obligatory to her, like finishing every book she started. And I can relate to that so hard. I think in my life, I have only ever turned off, I think, one movie. Otherwise, I'm so nosy, I have to know how it ends. Grief can also help us appreciate the present moment because losing someone we love really underscores the fragility of life and the unpredictability of time. For Gabby's part, she mentioned taking more pictures to capture memories, knowing that these mementos are going to be significant when people are gone. And as I mentioned, I do the same thing, both in my own life, but also when my husband's family gathers, because there's nobody on that side of the family that's really thinking about that. And I grew up in a place where there were always pictures and slides and documentation. So that's something I think I bring into that family that I've joined. Grief also helps us to let go of shoulds. And I know this whole 40 transition is about letting go of shoulds, but Gabby talked about really letting go of the shoulds in parenting and in life and really focusing on what felt right for her and her family. So grief can often challenge those societal or self imposed shoulds after losing someone we love. We find the courage to disregard or abandon the rules and expectations that no longer serve us once we realize how short time is. And we start to choose to live in alignment with our own needs and desires because life is too short to just keep shoulding all over ourselves. Grief also, I think, helps us find greater connection and empathy as well. Gabby talked about how she leaned on her sisters and her family during her losses and found really some strength there in shared experiences and in building new memories. And I think going through something like that often really deepens our empathy for other people going through similar situations. So that really can help us to develop a stronger sense of connection and compassion, which allows us really to offer support to the people we know who are struggling. Another thing that grief does is to help us to redefine what success is and what fulfillment feels like. And Gabby really illustrated that with her dedication to her writing as it became a central part of her healing process. Grief can also lead us to redefine what success means. So instead of those external achievements, success might shift to include things like emotional well being, time with our loved ones, pursuing our passions and our hobbies and other things that bring us joy, which then leads to living with greater intentionality. The acceptance of our mortality and the finite nature of the time we have left often inspires people to make choices with greater intention. So, grief really reminds us of life's impermanence and pushes us to focus on what's going to make us happy and make us feel fulfilled rather than to continue pursuing what others might expect of us. And on Gabby's part, she really made a conscious choice to balance her career, her family, and her creative pursuits and put a greater emphasis on the balance there rather than just the things that she should be doing. Grief also, I think, reshapes our values by breaking down what feels unnecessary or insignificant, which kind of leaves behind this sharper focus on love, on connection, on purpose, and on being present. Because while the pain of loss is profound, it is often transformative, prompting us to live more fully in the time that we do have. And speaking of the time that we do have left, let me tell you who you're going to meet next week. When he was 40, Mark Scheff was threatened on the streets of New York City by a couple of construction workers after he stuck up for a woman they were catcalling at, and it left him shaken. That was the event that got him into jiu-jitsu, which changed his life, his fitness level, and his outlook. But a few years later, he stumbled into a dream project that ultimately didn't work out, and he had to work his way through that disappointment, loss, and identity crisis. I had such a great conversation with Mark, and I cannot wait to share it with you. So I'll see you next week. The 40 Drinks podcast is produced and presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications.